What is up, YouTube? I stole that intro directly from C-Bum. So, yeah, welcome to another episode of me reading my own book so that all you lamos with excuses like I don't read or I don't have time to read or any of the other following ones, now you can either watch me read it or listen. So, here we go. This chapter is called Uncomfortable Conversations. And already from the first paragraph, it might be a little bit uncomfortable to get started. So let's just go ahead and get started. So, Uncomfortable Conversations. I think this will be chapter 12, I think. Yeah, chapter 12. At the time of my initial notes being written for the idea of including this chapter, we were at a pivotal period of 2020 in which George Floyd was just murdered. The discussions of racial inequality, police brutality, etc. were all at the forefront of our minds in pretty much every news headline out there. The most recommended books in my weekly Barnes & Noble email list were either about the history of racial inequality in the United States, books by African American authors, or some sort of combination of the two. I have to admit, as with what I assume is most of the white male population of the United States, I was very undereducated, maybe completely uneducated, on a lot of what those books talked about. Not being afraid to admit to anything like that, I looked into a few. I managed to start the Malcolm X biography, and separately another book with an overview of what the 1960s looked like for African Americans. While this second book focused on a lot of what Martin Luther King Jr. did before his unfortunate assassination, the biggest takeaway from those books, the social media posts and TV interviews, was that we have such a long way to go in terms of fixing the obvious elephant in the room. There are things we can do better, dare I say, on both sides. The quote-unquote tough conversations part I initially had in my mind was basically how a lot of people who are not directly affected or impacted by what's been going on often avoid having those conversations because it makes people uncomfortable. But that's precisely the point. Without going too deep into this, I wanted to at least address it because I don't want this to turn into something I try to talk about without acknowledging my incredulous level of ignorance and multiple perspectives of this conversation. I didn't want to shy away from it completely because then I become part of the very problem I say needs fixing. Silence in the face of evil is the same as choosing the side of evil in the first place. I didn't quote it here, but I think that is actually from Martin Luther King. I have tried to hear/listen to conversations from anyone I can think of who would have any sort of value to add to the discussion. Different occupations, upbringings, age groups, etc. The importance of taking each individual seriously is at the top of the list. Police officers, older adults, younger adult children, who seem to think and observe without playing into their emotions too much, as well as the undereducated white male like myself. Compliance issues, ignorance of overall pressure of officer occupational hazards, overexertion of brute force, and a more recent history of segregation than a large majority of people would like to admit all come to mind when thinking back on those conversations. I would tell my younger self that there are too many variables to control with one overarching rule or procedure. It is definitely a situational basis. Transitioning to a little different side of things, there are still tough conversations we need to have outside of racism, gender, demographics, etc. I wanted to discuss the things that have the potential to bring friends and family closer together or continue to push them further apart. Tough conversations need to be had to avoid any sort of bad situation getting worse. These conversations can be deemed tough because of the topic needing discussion, the person needing the talking to, or some combination of the two. These are important, but by no means are they ever any fun. First off, I would like to preface, just as I did above, that context and perspective are incredibly important. If you go about things the wrong way, not only will your information not be taken seriously by the receiving party, you may even make the situation worse. Not to mention the relationship between you and said party will be unnecessarily strained or just plain ruined. You have to make sure that you're in the right mindset and position to give advice or any sort of correctional talk. Aside from making sure you're not just being overrun with your emotions, you also have to take into consideration where the other person is at in terms of being able to receive anything you're saying. People often say communication is key. Yes, that is true, but also comprehension is just important, if not more so. You can communicate all you want, but if the other person is not understanding what you're trying to say, none of it matters in the first place. You are literally wasting your own breath as well as your time and theirs. So you have to be smart about it, make sure it's the right context, environment, and timing. For myself personally, I can think of a few times where I've been on both sides of the difficult to have conversation. I think I'll just stick with explaining where I learned of its necessity by being on the opposite side. For the majority of my early working life, I worked at the Chick-fil-A close to my house on the south side of Oklahoma City. 5 years total to be exact. My mom handed me an application as part of my 16th birthday present, and out of a few places I had reluctantly applied for, They were the only place to call me back. Initially, I was the shyest person you have ever met in your entire life. Honestly, it's still that way to this day. If I'm in a new environment and I'm still trying to take it in and process my surroundings and observe the people there, I more than likely will not say much, if anything. I put a lot of pressure on myself to be as perfect as possible. The older I get, the more I realize that that is not a healthy way to go through life. No one is perfect, and the only way you learn anything is by messing it up a few times first. But I know there are a few things I had to mess up a lot of times. I tend to learn the hard way, often unnecessarily. For those of you who don't know me, I am by far one of the most stubborn people you will ever meet in your life. Moving on. Once more comfortable in the job, more responsibilities were given to me. As with anything, when you show that you can be trusted to handle what is in front of you, you slowly are allowed to take on more. First lesson was the easiest. Take orders at the register and make sure I spelled all the names right. It was here that I learned that there are some pretty bland names out there, but there are also some super unique ones too. It's also where I learned that a lot of people my age and even some older ones could not spell to save their own lives, but I won't go into that. I got so good at taking orders and taking names that I could all but take orders with my eyes closed. I knew where all the buttons were and all the shortcuts to each custom item. I also knew the long way too, and would sometimes take that way just to be obnoxious to the kitchen staff as well as the people putting the orders together. That's what I do when I get comfortable. I start to be ornery and mess with people. It's usually harmless, fun, with no ill intention involved. Even then, I knew when and where it was okay, as well as when it was certainly not okay to do so. Boundaries were always something I was aware of. The tricky part was usually when someone was comfortable enough to dish the foolishness right back. Those types of people are my absolute favorite. If you can let me have my fun and mess with you and then come back at me with something equally as funny, or heck, something even funnier, boom, instant friendship. Once we've established that we both can go back and forth, no hard feelings shall be had, and no tattling will go on, things are golden. The more friends I made at work and the more comfortable I got, the line that separated the jokesters I enjoyed going at it with on the regular and the more sensitive types began to gray. At one point, I felt that everyone should be well aware that I'm all about jokes and having a good time. I just hadn't appropriately determined where certain people ranked and in what kind of stuff they could handle, especially in the kitchen area. For those of you who know what it's like working in any part of the food service industry, you know that there is a bit of a difference between the kitchen staff and the front counter staff. At the time, I had yet to make my way back to begin learning the other half of the store more than maybe 2 or 3 times. And at the Chick-fil-A drive-thru pace, it is a basically nonstop anxiety and stress-inducing environment until you can get back there and learn the process. There are a few people I made fast friends with, mostly because I had made small talk in the months leading up to me making the crossover to the back, coupled with my common sense ability to just do my job without complaining. There were a few whom I had yet to really talk to, but one lady in particular I had not put any extra effort into speaking to past work pleasantries and the occasional "where can I find this?" question. As I mentioned above, if I'm unsure about places, people, and things, I just stay quiet. I stay quiet and I observe. I have to process and develop what I feel is the appropriate response to what I'm seeing and hearing. I think I owe this one to my mom, but I can usually get a pretty accurate vibe from someone and determine whether the individual and I would be able to get along and be friends. So far, this lady and I were quite an incompatible match. I'd never been much for dramatics and complaining, but she took it to the next level, which I noticed brought the overall mood of the kitchen and everyone else down with her. So putting it nicely, we were not the best of friends right off the bat. Not that I held anything against her, because she hadn't technically done anything to me. I just do my best to avoid allowing that type of mentality into my space. I consider myself a rather patient and mild-mannered person, but having that type of thing around me brings out the opposite of that. It takes a lot for me to get annoyed, but once it's there, it is there for sure. And for good reason. If you think I sounded mean then, you don't even want to know how I am now. I think that should be backwards. I used to be way worse back when I was younger, but most of us are. Anyways, it is important that you mitigate any sort of negativity in your life as much as possible. The world is already crazy enough. Throughout my childhood, my parents tried their best to instill a sense of appreciation for hard work and the possibilities of the outcome because of that hard work. Complaining wasn't something they were ever in the mood to hear in tandem with the work that needed to be put in. You weren't allowed to want the result, then complain the entire time. So naturally, this particular coworker of mine was the exact opposite of how I was raised, and it irked me more than it probably should have. From my 17-year-old perspective, Sue was much older than I was, had a stable income coming in, and was married with kids. She had all the cool stuff that people my age were currently beginning to think about, wanting, and or working towards. Looking back, I know that perspective was a little harsh and lacked quite a bit of empathy because my age caused a great amount of ignorance to the situation as a whole. That being said, I still tried to be friends because I wasn't dumb enough to think that she couldn't help me in terms of working in the kitchen and at the least what not to do with my life in the future. For the first couple of interactions, it was mostly just how to do things and where to find things. Cooking fries, where to restock, and how to plan ahead so I didn't get behind schedule and hold all the orders up in the dining room, thus ruining the reputation of speedy drive-thru service, etc. She helped with a lot of my kitchen training for sure. Obviously, in between the craziness, there was time to small talk and get to know each other past our name tags in the place of employment. I learned about her kids and her husband and found out how much extra stress she had that I didn't have any idea about in the first place. I mentioned where I was at in school and what my current goal after high school was. Getting to know each other allowed me to get a little bit more comfortable around her, and gradually we would crack jokes. It was a much slower process than with pretty much everyone else, but it got there. The occasional go-too-far jokes didn't cause any issues in the beginning because she would always shoot right back. As I said, if you can dish it back, I'm always down, especially if they're funny. Thinking back to that, I can't say I had much of a limit past what I wouldn't tolerate, just because I didn't allow people to get under my skin like that. As time went on, things between my coworker and I weren't necessarily bad, but they never really got past a certain point because no matter what happened, something was always wrong. After a while, even with my patience level, that just gets annoying. A few times that I made jokes, I could tell that I would hit a certain nerve because she wouldn't respond, or she would just tell me to go F myself. I would laugh so hard after those quick jabs. I can't really explain why, but each time she did that, it made me immediately look for my next opportunity. Something I give myself a lot of credit for is paying attention to details. I can really make someone's day by remembering personal things or pointing out small details in the right context. In the wrong context, I can use what I notice pretty maliciously. Just like Uncle Ben told Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. I, unfortunately, chose to use it for the wrong reasons, but that's where the lesson comes. As with most jobs, there's a general procedure you take for disciplining your employees. There are stages of gradual steps you can try and resolve the issue without going straight to firing the individual. Out of the times I'd gotten in trouble, most often it was just a manager talking to me and telling me to chill or correcting me. The issues with my kitchen coworker were on a plateau for a bit, but once I started noticing the small stuff that bothered her, it went on a steep decline. Unfortunately, to the point that I had actually made her cry on more than one occasion, and it made the people working with her in the kitchen turn towards me on their own and try to get me to chill. My manager at the time of all this was basically my older brother. He and I got along well at work, but even better outside of work. He's more or less in the same boat about all the kitchen ladies complaining as I was, but he was in a position of authority and had to set a better example. At the peak of the situation, he brought me into the office, sat me down, and said I just had to leave her alone altogether. At first, I tried to argue my case and say it wasn't even that serious, but he didn't even let me finish before he interrupted me. He told me that although he somewhat agreed with my overall opinion and knew I was trying to have some fun, I had to draw a line somewhere in the sand. And since I seemed to have no intentions of doing so, he was doing it for me. He looked at me with the most serious face I had ever seen from him, and he told me that if I didn't do what I was told, I would be written up right then and there, no questions asked. Coming from someone who was supposed to be my big brother and who was supposed to have my back, that hit a little harder than I expected. Initially, I was angry and I was offended. Growing up, I never really got into any sort of trouble or anything like that, so for my best friend to be the one who would write me up and not someone outside of my trust, it hurt. After a little bit of thinking and processing it all, I calmed down. I realized that all of the stuff I was mad at my manager for was the exact reason he was so serious. He was trying to be the right kind of friend and big brother, not someone who just let all the dumb stuff I was doing slide because of our relationship outside of work. From that moment forward, I did what I was told. It took a little bit more for me to get back to talking and laughing with everyone, including my manager, but I got there. I did my best to brush it off, but I did everything I could to avoid the kitchen lady for a while. I'd walk down the opposite side of the store if I saw her coming. I would only ask for her help as a very last resort. It bothered me more than it should have, but what can I say? Aren't all 17-year-olds overly emotional? And don't all of them hold pretty unnecessary grudges? I feel like if you claim otherwise, you were most likely the 17-year-old who became the 37-year-old holding on to some grudges and who is just as emotional. Do us all a favor, including yourself, and don't be that guy. Surround yourself with people who are willing to tell you when you are wrong, but also who are willing to help you make things right when they need to be. Most of I guess depending on who you ask, most of my coworkers now know that I can joke, and that is the only way that I manage the team I'm in charge of, is I just roast the absolute crap out of you, and hopefully you can take it. I do try to make sure that I keep it under control, just like my manager at the time back then did. Some people don't realize the pull or the weight that their words carry. And then especially being in a position of leadership, you have to be the one to point that out. I try to keep a fine line between like hazing and having a good time and bullying, because there's definitely a line. That's one of the main lessons I've definitely learned and taken with me through my leadership course of life is know where the line is and make sure that you keep the line where it's at in terms of like differences between like just messing with your coworkers and straight up bullying. I think back then when I was 17, I was 100% bullying that chick to the point where she like cried and like told me to go F myself. So definitely crossed the line. But anyways, we will be A-okay from here. Moving forward. College is knowledge. I'll be honest. I think this is one of the main chapters I've been looking forward to while reading this, just because it's pretty personal to me, depending on if either of my parents listen to this or any of my close family. College is a very I wouldn't say touchy subject. It was pretty set in stone for a while, and then I was the black sheep and took the other route. So that was a little bit of uncomfortableness for a while, just because, my parents really wanted me to go to college and I did not. And it's not that, I couldn't do college. It's that I did not want to. Without going any deeper, just in case I go off any sort of tangent, let's get started. All right, this would be 13. College is knowledge. So aside from taking a few concurrent classes throughout my senior year of high school, I hadn't really given any thought to my future or even college by the time it finally came around. Because of my grades throughout high school, I received a few smaller scholarship offers from colleges I had never heard of. One from Baylor University, the only D1 school out of any of them, and then oddly enough, a letter from the University of Oklahoma. I had not done my due diligence of looking around and applying for colleges because, as I said, I haven't given it much thought. I didn't think it was all that important since it wasn't here yet, and I was still in high school. Little did I know. Secondly, what became more and more apparent the closer I got to college was the reality that I didn't have any way to pay for any of it. College was expensive, and even if I worked full-time while going to school, I would be buried in a mountain of debt just like everyone else. Growing up, that was always something my parents told me, to avoid unnecessary debt because it was often extremely difficult to get out from underneath. I don't think they considered college to be bad debt necessarily, but I sure looked at it that way. All of that time and energy just to start out not only at zero, but below $0. Not a great selling point. I wanted to single out the letter from OU because although I had not applied to any universities, they still sent me a letter that saying based off of my performance in high school, they felt like I'd be a great fit on campus and encouraged me to apply soon. It did hurt a little because I knew even if I applied and got accepted, there was absolutely no way that was an option for my bank account. It was still the only college-related information I kept after graduating high school and enrolling at Oklahoma City Community College. I think only right before moving out of my parents' house, I think that is the only point that I decided to throw that letter away. I tacked it up on my wall to make sure that I never forgot that I had the opportunity. I just chose not to take it. The easy answer for what to choose as a major was just to follow in the footsteps of more than half of my mom's side of the family and go to school for accounting. Accounting itself wasn't easy, but that was all I could think of, and I actually liked the numbers. I was always good at math, so when the question of what are you going to school for ever came around, I was always prepared. To add the cherry on top, every person who heard me reply with accounting always said the same quote-unquote positive things. They would bring up the nice paychecks, the relatively flexible schedule depending on which accounting path I took, the fact that there would always be a necessity for accountants in the world, or any sort of combination of those three. My parents seemed happy with my decision to do that, so I figured that was all I needed to do. Go to school, get a job, and I'd be set for life. Technically, yes, it was and still is that easy, especially because of how easily math and numbers came to me. Math and reading were always classes I never had to try all that hard in throughout high school. Just show up, pay attention to class, do the homework, pass the test, repeat. Boom, easy A. I never even had to study outside of class because I was already so on top of the work most of the time. That's exactly where I learned my very first lesson about college. College wasn't the same as high school. It's a bit of a no-brainer, but for myself, I didn't completely wrap my head around it until I started attending my math classes. I began to try and use the same routine from high school, starting with just paying attention in class. No other extra effort was necessary from there. After the first few classes, I was still completely lost. Only then did I begin to realize that I was way out of my league and needed to step up my study game immediately, or I was going to receive my first F in my entire life, and I had absolutely no clue how to study. I remember thinking back to my elementary and junior high days where I could memorize cheat codes for any Grand Theft Auto video games just by glancing over the sheet of notes I had and saying it out loud to myself. Those button combinations would be ingrained in my brain for the rest of my life. I told myself that it couldn't be that hard and just to follow the same approach. That worked for some formulas and the occasional way of doing a problem or two. If the numbers changed too much or the order of the problem was switched around even slightly, it was game over for me. I may as well have been absent from the class entirely, the entire semester, or be one of the troublemakers in the back who had never paid attention. This being my first lesson about college, my next one would immediately follow, having the humility to admit that I needed help and then to ask for it. I hated that feeling. I had no problems asking for help if something was out of my reach or if I couldn't do something at work because I didn't know how. I had never in my life been the person who needed to stay after class and ask the teacher for help. It was certainly a bit of an ego killer, but I also had never seen such a low percentage grade next to my name since I started going to school. Something had to be done, and I was the only one who could take care of it. Carefully avoiding placing blame on anyone but myself, lesson 3 for college was actually a rather significant one for my next couple of years of life, and specifically leadership. Just because someone is a professional in a certain field doesn't mean that they are automatically able to teach it to someone else. My first attempt at an accounting class, I legitimately failed out of it. My professor was a retired CPA just looking for a way to spend his retirement. I knew by now to ask plenty of questions if I needed it, and I got only half of those adequately responded to. Some people just don't know how to teach. I was clear on all the terminology he was using, like debits and credits and all of that. After the basics, I couldn't get it down to save my own life. Not to say he didn't try, but he couldn't explain it to me in a way that I could comprehend it all. And I was lost the whole way through. The next semester, I took the same class, but made sure I had a different professor, and I passed with an easy A. The lesson I learned was that it's not about the subject matter being taught. It was about whether the teacher could educate in more than just one way or not. Not everyone learns in the same way, so it was important to make sure each student's comprehension was where it needed to be. That goes with teaching anyone anything. A quote I read on Instagram, oddly enough, was an extensive caption of someone's post, but it ended with, "If you can't simplify things down enough to teach what you know to a 4-year-old, you don't know it well enough." Not that 4-year-old children are unable to learn complex things, but you have to start out small before you get into the nitty-gritty details of a lot of things. That's the same for anyone, teenagers, adults, and even grandparents. One of my favorite things to do is teach or train new employees at each of the jobs I've had. It allows me to put into action the lesson I had to learn the hard way in college and do my very best to teach it in a way that other people can understand. And if they don't, I need to know plenty of other ways to teach the same exact lesson. If not, then I don't know enough and I need to get better. It's as simple as that. Not to mention, it's a good review for yourself because you're sifting through all the information you've been taught and regurgitating it all. It's a great way to see if things have changed since you were first taught, if you need to brush up on some areas, and possibly even build a little bit of extra confidence in yourself. Once I got the hang of it, accounting classes were just about the only thing I ever truly enjoyed in college. I have about 2 years of college education under my belt, and I managed that in about 3 years' time. Combine the time it took to retake both my first accounting class and my first nutrition class due to failing the first time, and add the amount of stalling I did, and it took 3 years total. After finally getting over the hump of learning how to properly study and ask questions, I started to get into leisure reading again. I started reading a lot of self-help books and watching people like Gary Vaynerchuk on Instagram. This is also when I started listening to Andy Frisella and his podcasts again. I'll delve deeper into what and who I consider Andy to be at a later point, but just know that he's very important. I began to realize I had a problem, a huge problem that could not be avoided much longer. The more I thought about it, I knew for sure that I had absolutely no desire to attend college anymore. I didn't want to be stuck at a desk all day no matter how much money I made. One of the first things my parents taught us throughout our high school years was to go to college so we could get a good job. Neither of my parents went to college out of high school. My dad had multiple occasions where he had attended continuing education courses on Saturdays. My mom had a couple years of children's education under her belt. Nothing further for either of them at that time. I say at that time because my mom is now officially graduated college. She doesn't graduate. She has room to go further. But in terms of job position and everything, she's completed all the requirements to get promoted. For the same financial reasons I couldn't attend a fancy university, my parents had to hold off on college completely. They encouraged all of us to take advantage of an opportunity that they never had and had to work towards a few years after high school graduation. Thinking back to those conversations, I knew the decision to completely drop out of college was not going to go over well with either one of them. I did my best to weigh out my options, but at the end of the day, I could no longer force myself to finish what I had started. I took the summer to think things over and came to the conclusion that maybe I just needed to switch majors. If I was no longer interested in becoming any sort of accountant, and I was more interested in becoming some sort of coach or personal trainer, I could go that route. I decided I would make an effort to become a physical therapist instead and enrolled in an 8-week fast-track summer course. This particular course was a physics class, so it was already demanding, but the amount of weekly work required to pass, paired with an older professor with a heavy German accent, she was very nice, but I couldn't understand what she was saying. She was the last straw. That class as a whole, with everything involved, was the last straw. Even after rearranging my work schedule with my boss and grinding out the first couple of assignments, I could barely understand what my professor was saying in the first place. That was it. I made the final decision to drop out of college completely. I knew my parents wouldn't be happy, so I did what any logical 22-year-old would do when they don't want to disappoint their parents. I just never told them. And I didn't plan on telling them for a very long time. I still went to the school to work out and to sit in the library to read the books I was actually interested in. I still went to my job like I normally would have. Nobody ever questioned a thing. Oddly enough, a friend of mine had recently gone through a similar situation of completely withdrawing from college and didn't plan on telling his parents either. They found out on their own somehow, and he ended up having to break the news to them the hard way. After telling me about the whole situation and how much of a mess it was, he told me that no matter what I did, I had to make sure my parents found out from me and no one else. Yeah, they would probably be extremely disappointed, but going behind their back and lying for so long would only be adding gasoline to the fire. I made the decision right then and there that I had to tell my parents sooner rather than later. Shout out to Cameron Smith. He probably won't ever listen to this either. He cut me out of a lot of problems just by telling me to tell my parents that I dropped out of college. So, shout out to you, my guy. As expected, my parents did not take it very well. My mom tried to mention how much harder it would be to get a good job anywhere without a sort of college diploma, and my dad brought up better jobs also having better benefits for their employees. Both were solid points. I didn't try to minimize any of that. In the end, the biggest thing I remember is the enormous amount of weight that was lifted off of my shoulders. I didn't have any idea of what I was going to do with my life at that point, but I knew I was in complete control from there. Whatever ended up becoming of my life was up to me. And not to mention, if I ever did happen to want to go back to school, college wasn't going anywhere. In today's day and age where things like YouTube, podcasts, social media videos, etc. exist, you can learn just about anything. Obviously, it's not that simple in every category, but the level of difficulty to obtain any amount of information is almost non-existent. 99 out of 100 people have a smartphone these days. All smartphones have access to the internet, and with just a couple of finger taps, you can be presented with literally millions of search results. This does present a few drawbacks, considering that there are not nearly as many validity filters as there are results to read through. There are virtually no mandatory qualifications to post whatever you want on the internet. A pretty common statement I make when people ask me about anything diet or supplement related while at work is, whatever you look for on the internet these days, you can probably find. Whether it be a certain diet is the best for you or that one supplement works better than the other, I'm almost certain you'll be able to find the evidence needed to back whatever you claim to be true. The plethora of information we have at our disposal has caused for a great deal of controversy and miscommunication. That being said, avenues like YouTube videos, various podcasts, and a select few accounts across social media platforms have taught me a great deal, all for free. If you want to get specific, I just need to make sure I pay my phone bill. The lesson for all of this audiobook so far, if you don't read through your writing and find mistakes and find things you can change, you're not growing as a reader or a writer. So, moving forward. I bring this up to say that although there's plenty of ways to truly screw up your life without a college level of education, it is possible to still make it somewhere in life without that slip of paper that has a seal of approval with your name on it. Dream chasing is a touchy subject because most people only ever talk about said dreams. They don't actually do anything or put any sort of action behind the dreams that they go on and on about. I've always wanted to do and be more than just a guy with a college education and a good job. Yes, I want the nice paycheck, the house, the family, the dog, cars, benefits, you name it. I want all of it. So much of our world today has all of that, and a great majority of them either hate their jobs, wish they went to school for something else, or just hate their lives entirely. I do not want any of that. If that's what comes with taking the usual route in life, I will gladly hop off the bus and walk. I don't just want a good life. I want a great one. Call me cheesy, but I fully believe it's possible to achieve all the great things most people only dream about. Things you only see in movies, or what only star athletes and celebrities seem to have. Doing incredible things like retiring your parents can't be done with a regular job. Degree or not, it's not going to happen. It's a lot scarier this way, and there are plenty of stressors to go around that normally wouldn't exist if you had taken the traditional route. You don't have nearly as much support around you, and there are certain lessons you have to learn the hard way. One of the most common lessons being that you're flat out broke for a while. It's not just sunshine and rainbows all the time because you're chasing something no one else can see but you. You go through some ugly stuff because you choose to avoid the easier path. As I mentioned, depending on the person, this can really break you down and put you in a bad spot. I credit everything I am today to my parents. So although I'm not where I could have been by now, I'm still alive and moving in the right direction. Dropping out of college was the scariest thing I've ever decided to do with my life. Not a day goes by that my parents don't mention college and the possibilities. The important thing is that I'm happy with where I'm at and where I'm headed. My parents raised too stubborn of a kid to settle for anything less than what I want. If you're thinking about doing something crazy like dropping out of college, think about it real hard. Careers like doctors, lawyers, etc. don't have any other option than to go to college. I wouldn't think for even a second about hiring a doctor or a lawyer who doesn't have their college education fully finished. I'm not stupid. I'm also well aware that I have no desire to be any of those things. I don't have a specific field I want to box myself into, but I certainly know what I don't want to be. You have to be honest with yourself. Is college the right thing for you to do? Will that put you on the path to where you want to go in life? If not, then why are you still going? No matter what, you are the only person who has to deal with the consequences of any action you take in life. Although it's uncomfortable at first, short-term disappointment while you're figuring your own life out will make for a solid long-term life down the road. If you do everything everyone else expects you to do, but you grow resentful towards all of those people, who is really at fault then? Nobody but yourself. You have to decide what you want your life to be. You don't get to complain about the choices you allowed other people to make for you. Think long and hard about what you want to do and then just go do it. Like I mentioned a while back, they'll adjust. That was that chapter. That one is interesting because I got to be careful here. For a while, I would say that my parents and I weren't on great terms because they were just like so constantly disappointed. And I didn't really have a plan either. So I think that's the scariest part because I know my parents to this day still want the best for me. And then, when I bring up certain things that don't consist of college or like college could have helped me get there faster kind of thing, it's still kind of one of those like, you should have done this or you should have done that kind of things. Now that I am doing well, doing all right, I'm not worried about whether I'm going to choose between rent or gas or groceries. I can pay for all three now. It's not as stressing. And my parents see that there's actually a future to what I'm doing in my life now. They're not as like gung-ho about like you made a bad decision by not going to college. They're a little easier on me about it, and then they can see that I'm like actually happy too. I'll never forget one of the first pictures that was posted on social media with me in some sort of like triad uniform. I think it was just a triad t-shirt, but I was like genuinely smiling. I don't usually like put myself out there in terms of like, let me pose for this picture, let me smile just because kind of thing. That used to make me very uncomfortable. I don't like being the center of attention. But just in that moment, we were at meeting and I was just having a good time, talking to Alfonso, talking to Zach. We posted it and I just like shared it onto my Facebook. And my sister was like, you actually look like genuinely happy here. That was something I will never forget because that is proof that I made the right decision. We are a small business, and at the time of that photo, we were struggling to just stay afloat as one store. And now, by the time this comes out, it'll be like less than a month and we'll be opening our third location. But if someone who is not directly involved in the situation, so obviously my sister has her own life and her own job, but someone who is not directly like in the situation, in the mud, in the like hard stuff of working there, if someone on the outside can tell that I'm genuinely happy, that's all the proof I need. It's still very hard. I literally always work all the time, but I enjoy being there. I enjoy the impact we have on people, and I enjoy being able to say I helped said individual do whatever goal or like give them a stepping stone to reach whatever like goal or achievement, I guess, that they're shooting for, which is all that matters. So although, yes, technically, if I were to have finished accounting school, because get this, I only have 12, 15-ish credit hours to finish before I have my degree and I can go find a job or whatever, I refuse to go back and I will not, ever. Technically, as an accountant, I could help people balance their checkbooks and do whatever. Technically, yeah, I would still be helping people. This is a very hands-on approach to helping people. So although it was scary for a little bit and it was like, man, did I really just like drop out of college to work at a supplement store? Yes, I did. And we are more than just a supplement store. So I'm glad I dropped out of college. So if you are on the fence about dropping out of college and disappointing every important person in your life, like your parents, like your husband or your wife, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, sisters, everyone that looks up to you, if you have a lot of pressure on you to complete college, but you know that it is not right for you, it's going to suck for a while. There's no sugarcoating that. It's going to suck for a while, and lots of people are just going to give you bad looks and, say you made the wrong decision, make you feel bad, and they're going to do all of that. But the most important part, I think I've said this in multiple episodes, probably one each episode, it's a weight lifted off your shoulders, and you can say that you made that choice yourself. Nobody made it for you. As uncomfortable and no fun as it was for a little bit, I'm okay with dropping out of college. And as a joke, I do encourage more people to do so. It's just my attempt at saying, like, do you actually want to go to college because you want to go to college and like follow that career path? Or are you going to college because someone told you it's the only way to make it anywhere in life? You can do anything with a regular job and a little bit of hard work and some sweat. I paid for this entire book to be published, edited, front cover designed, even though it's pretty bland. I paid for all of this with my regular old job triad paycheck. Obviously, a little side hustle of watching dogs on the weekends and stuff for people. I paid for this by myself. So I just want to make sure that y'all know that it's possible. You know, if you drop out of college and then you don't have a plan, and you just assume everything will just drop into your lap, that's wrong, and you deserve all the bad stuff that happens to you because you're being lazy. If you have something you want to do, like be an author, if you got a dream, you got to chase it. You got to put you on the earth for a reason, and you got to figure it out, and you got to go for it. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter what you did in the past. Doesn't matter what you're doing right now. The only thing that matters is you figure out what it is, and you go for it. So, not to get like motivational like speaker or whatnot on you, but shout out to my guy Alfonso for telling me to shut up and actually just like put this together, because I finally did. And now I tell everybody else to do that. Shut up and get to work. So if you want to do something, go for it, even if it's scary. Really quick, this is one of the shirts I'm releasing. It's going to be a long sleeve, but it's black with white words. We have a purple hoodie that's going to be like literally just like straight bright purple, because I like purple, and that's why I'm doing it with black words. I'm going to do a gray and black hoodie with black words. I'm going to do a green shirt that is on one of the previous episodes. And then I'm going to do like a crimson and cream long sleeve for my Sooners who are playing like complete garbage. I'm well aware, but that's why I did that color. And that's it. But those should be releasing sometime at the end of this. But I will be posting photos pretty much everywhere and like updating the website and everything. But t-shirts, long sleeves, hoodies. It'll be a very limited quantity. Shout out to Sean. Buy all the Rice and Grinds and the Rice Krispies and the Pride Butters. He's great. This is all of his equipment anyways. I don't think I've said that in a couple episodes. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Alfonso. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Go do something nice for someone else immediately. Bye.